Cryptids don't hide from us. Ain't that right? We just haven't learned the ability to see them yet.
What do you see when you're in the dark?
Welcome to Buried Stories. I'm Jeff Mercurio. Along with me tonight, we got Wendell Brown. Wendell, how are you, man?
Doing well. How you doing, Jeff?
Joined
Yeah,
by
go ahead.
Steve Mercurio. Steve, how are you, man?
Hey man, I'm good, man. I'm super excited tonight, man. I heard you have one hell of a story to tell us tonight, and you know what I mean? So that I'm always excited to be on this show. So looking
Good,
forward to this episode.
good. All right, gentlemen. So we'll start like this. It's a cool autumn night with a soft breeze flowing across the field of maize. The stalks whisper against one another like dry bones, bending beneath the pale moon that hangs over the endless forest of the Midwest. Long before railroads cut through the wilderness, before towns rose beside the rivers, the land belonged to silence, to the old spirits, and to the tribes who understood them. Near the edge of the dense northern woodland, an Ojibwe hunting camp sat quiet beneath the stars. Fires crackled. Children slept beneath buffalo hides. The elders spoke in shuffled tones around the glowing embers, careful not to speak too loudly once darkness settled over the trees. Because in those woods, hunger listened. A young hunter named Makwa stood watch beyond the camp, with his bow resting against his shoulder. Snow had not yet fallen, but the cold already carried winter's warning. Game had gone scarce. 3 hunters had vanished over the past moon, leaving behind only tracks that ended abruptly in the forest. No wolves, no blood, only silence. Then came the sound, crunch, slow footsteps beyond the maize field. Makwa narrowed his eyes. "Who walks there?" he called softly. No answer. The breeze died instantly. The maize stopped moving. Then from between the stalks emerged a figure, impossibly tall and painfully thin. Its skin stretched tight across jagged bones. Its antler-like limbs bent underneath as it moved. Hollow eyes reflected moonlight like frozen water. The creature smiled, too wide, yet too human. Makwa felt his chest tighten as the old stories returned to him all at once. The elders had warned of a spirit born from greed and starvation, a thing that was once human, had consumed by endless hunger. The Wendigo. It moved without sound now, gliding toward the camp with twitching movements like a dying animal. A rotten smell drifted through the air, mixed with the scent of wet earth and decay. Behind Makwa, one of the elders suddenly shouted from the fire, "Don't let it speak your name!" But it already had. In a voice like crackling trees and distant screams, the creature whispered, "Makwa." The hunter froze. The Wendigo lunged. Its body exploded through the maize field, stalks snapping violently as claws slashed through the darkness. Makwa fired an arrow that vanished straight into its chest, but the creature barely slowed. Campfires scattered as warriors rose in panic. Children screamed. Dogs howled. The forest answered. The Wendigo tore through the edge of the camp with terrifying speed, its long arms dragging across the earth. One brave warrior struck it with a spear, and for a second the creature shrieked, a sound so unnatural, the very woods seemed to recoil. And it smiled again, and the warrior disappeared into the darkness. The elders began chanting around the fire, throwing sacred herbs into the flames. Thick smoke rolled upward as the creature circled just beyond the light, watching them patiently, waiting, because the Wendigo did not hunt for food alone. It hunted weakness, fear, desperation. Winter came early that year. By the first heavy snowfall, the hunting camp had vanished completely. When a small group of French settlers passed through the region months later, they found abandoned lodges buried in snow and strange tracks surrounding the ruins. Tracks that looked almost human, almost. The settlers spoke of hearing cries deep in the forest at night. Some claimed they saw a towering shape moving between the trees during blizzards, impossibly thin beneath the moonlight. And the tribes of the Midwest continued warning their children of the spirit that wandered the frozen wilderness. The spirit with endless hunger. The spirit that was once a man. The Wendigo. And that's the story for this evening, gentlemen. So tonight, we're going to talk about the Wendigo. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little spicy campfire type story.
I guess we're talking about the Wendigo, Steve.
The Wendigo.
Oh, man. I'll tell you what, man. I'm always a sucker for a great crypto story, man. You know, it's just one of those things I feel like, you know, as we explore each of these stories, we talk about the Bigfoots. I think you guys have mentioned the Dog Man, and maybe in the future we'll have a great show about the Dog Man, who some refer to as a werewolf, but it's more commonly today known as the Dog Man. I know you guys have talked about the Mothman, but man, the Wendigo. This one is scary, gentlemen. This one's a scary story from my understanding, because you know what kind of separates this from a lot of the other cryptos that we've talked about on here is this one, at least the stories say this was once human, right?
Yeah.
We've never mentioned like Bigfoot being a prior human. We always mention it being like some sort of primate potentially. You know, there's some other theories out there. Again, Dogman, I guess if you're thinking it's werewolf, potentially could have some human roots, but the Wendigo, man, Wendell, what do you think?
Have you ever seen or you've heard the saying, "You've got the devil in you"? You've heard that saying. Well, that's I think, and every time I think of the Wendigo, I think of skiers in an avalanche. Because the little that I know about it, it sounds a lot. And if you got to put yourself back in the time of when the Native Americans were roaming, and anybody else, settlers and things like that, they didn't have our houses and they didn't have our climate control. And, you know, a lot of these Wendigo legends come from up by the Great Lakes in Algonquin, Illinois, I think is the main one. And and I've always heard, like, with the skiers and stuff, and even people that are starving in general, that go to cannibalism, there's something that happens with their body because of too much human flesh, kind of thing. There's some metabolism thing.
Yeah.
So when I was researching this, it's been a couple weeks now, what I gathered was there's a point that, well, in desperation, I mean, Jeff, I don't know if it was the story you were referencing, but there's one story where the guy basically eats his family and then the whole village, or kills them anyway, doesn't eat them, but kills them. And they blame it on the Wendigo because it possessed him. And I can see how that that belief can be seen. I mean, after you get so desperate and starvation and you cross the line of doing whatever your body tells you to do, I guess it's like a vampire hunger.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're killing your own kids or killing your own family or your own village, you're pretty desperate and you're not yourself, I would say. So, that's where what I get out of it. It was from a lot of it is from starvation. When somebody crosses the line of survival and eats their like kind, um, they're not themselves anymore, and the legend grew as being possessed by the Wendigo. So I can
Right.
see that. I can see that in any situation where you're so desperate in starvation and cold. Cold. I mean, these people didn't have shelter. I mean, it's hard for us to relate because we can get out of the heat, we can get out of the cold, but they couldn't.
Right.
And
Hmm.
um and I think you do become something different. And when you cross that line, you're not yourself anymore. And
No.
people call it possessed, or that's why I said I really reminded me of that you had the devil in you, because I think once people cross that line, they do have the devil in them.
I hear that. The other thing about it, I mean, you're correct with cannibalism, starvation. The one that gets me is isolation too. I mean, these people are out there. It's in the freezing time of winter. You're with small groups, so you're isolated, and you got nothing but woods around it, silence and stuff. So it kind of reminds me of the movie The Shining, where he just goes nuts, and he's gonna take care of his family and just be done with them. So there's a little bit of that isolation where your mind can turn too, and I could, like you said, I could see that happening as well. And it's
Yeah,
one
the
of
story
those.
I heard was about somebody named Swift Runner or something like that. That was his name, but they investigated him and everything, followed him back out to the woods, and he finally admitted it. But yeah,
So some of the research I was doing on the Wendigo was, where do like the view or vision of the stag, right? Where does the Wendigo look? Because, I was watching one gentleman talk about it, and he's like, how it got to the stag with the antlers and all that. He goes, he couldn't find a location. He was trying to do some research on the Algonquins, if I'm correct.
hmm
And he said he couldn't find a description, so he's uncertain how it got to look like we kind of envision it today. So he was talking about like a newer version, which would be like you just described, Jeff, with
Yeah.
the stag with the antlers. But what was interesting is he called it a classic interpretation. All right. And he talked about it more of a haggard and decomposing corpse, skin tight over its bones, skin very thin and translucent, a layer of flesh for which its bones are ready to burst, sickly, white to ashy gray, long fingers with sharp nails to tear victims to shreds, and smell of death and decay, and teeth that resemble yellow fangs. So I found that interesting is, if as a different description of the same legend that we're talking about, same behaviors, same characteristics, just a completely different view of what we would refer to as a Wendigo. I
All
found
right,
that in.
that's pretty good too. And the way you just described it, I could see one of these tribes, Indian tribes, way back in the day that come across this village. There was a couple villages over, and seeing this person that is just decayed and translucent skin. I mean, they're starving out there. And this guy's starting to do cannibalism. He's losing weight. That skin is about to fall off. And then you take that and to train future generations, you start saying this creature is 9 foot tall. He lives in the woods just from that single, um, sighting of this man that just looks berserk. And you're right, the modern interpretation, I don't know exactly when it happened. We added the antlers at some point, but that's a good pinpoint, Steve.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I thought that was very interesting how because we've talked about prior Native American legends and kind of how they might have started based on some of their own languages to what we interpret it to be today. So I thought that that was a very interesting idea of, kind of how it transitioned over the years from something that potentially looked more like a zombie, potentially like a hungry human, cold and sick in the woods to something that we see now that looks beastly and, just scary and beastly and with a huge head. I've heard multiple interpretations of this thing getting so large and so powerful at the same time. So it's kind of interesting.
I think it kind of flows, with every interpretation. I mean, imagine us if we like walked into a mental institution that in an abandoned city, and somebody left behind this person that's genetically not correct in his feature, and he's moaning, and we see this, out of the dark. Oh, we come up with some tales telling the next person, which would start it would just domino effect for generations, man.
Well, not only that, I mean, like I said, once you cross that line, you do become an animal. You do become
Yes,
a
you do.
monster. You are a
Hmm.
monster,
Yeah.
and you may not be able to control it. You may not be able to stop it. May not be a choice of yours. Um, but I think when you get to a certain point, you do become something different. And like you said, Jeff, your body's going to change. You're going to be all gaunt and skinny, and you're starving. And
Right.
um, but I do think, as far as we talk about it being, they say it possesses them, and I think that's a more spiritual view of it. But once you do those things, you do get, if you call it possession, or you do change, and you're not who you used to be. You are a monster now. And I imagine when somebody's killing a whole village, they look like a monster to their victims. And I'm sure they're not seeing it as just a simple crime story of JR over there's killing the village. I'm sure they, especially if you don't know the individual, um, you would think it's something unhinged that's came after you.
Yeah.
But it all makes sense to me. It's interesting how people interpret it, possession, um, or whatever. But I think the main thing to me to this story is starvation. If the things you would do to survive, we probably can't even imagine. But we all say we wouldn't do this and wouldn't do that. But when until you're in that situation, you probably really don't know. Hopefully, we wouldn't do it, but still, back then, who knows how things we went. Maybe we have a lot to pull from our education and our technology and everything, and we see history. They didn't see history like we see history, and
Right.
they only knew what they were told, and up to that time. So, yeah, I can.
Plus,
It makes sense to me, the interpretations.
plus, you were talking about starvation. I've never been so. Yeah. You know how you go, man, I'm starving. I don't think any of us actually like dealt with actual starvation, because that's the only thing in your mind is I have to eat no matter what, and you will stop at nothing to find you. You'll start eating bark, tree bark, eating grass just to fill you up. And like you said, it would start changing your body because of, your body's actually eating some of itself for energy. So you would kind of go a little nuts. So yeah,
I mean, but
animalistic, sure.
you look at the vampire lore, and that's such a fictional thing for us, but it's so true throughout our
Hmm.
life. I mean, I'm a big guy. I've spent all kind of times trying to lose weight, not eat and everything, and your body won't let you not eat,
Oh no,
uh,
yeah.
times. At times, the hunger gets overwhelming, and you start justifying things in your mind. Like I said, speaking from just a easy diet thing in our generation, you start justifying things. This won't, portions. Yeah, portions. That's it. That's the key. Portions.
Yeah.
I can eat
Hmm.
portions. And I'm sure when you're on the brink of starvation, you justify all kind of things. And justifying it kind of goes to the old story, if you love your neighbors, but if it's between you and them, who's it going to be? It's kind of go.
Yeah.
Well, I love the where you guys kind of went with this is the transition from human to potential monster. We've kind of brought this up in some weird way. It kind of you brought up vampires, Wendell, and I love the idea because the reason I love that one is some of the ideas, the old legends of it, and we talk about this related to um you know vampires, right? The same thing is um the older it gets, the stronger it gets, and we've seen some of the vampire lore, right? Where the older a vampire gets, the stronger it gets, and actually the less I think it's the way it goes, the less amount of blood it needs as it gets older, but it gets stronger. And then we've also talked about it, Wendell, with berserkers, right? You were mentioning how you could see where humans after they potentially eat human meat, they're
Yeah,
different. They
yeah,
change, right? They're monsters at this point. But we talk about the Vikings becoming berserkers, right? They used to mention these men would turn into wolves and ravage villages and everything. I feel like there's a similar theme here with the Wendigo. Granted, it's from a different, like a different beginning, right? We talk about berserkers and everything becoming berserkers for wartime, but a Wendigo comes from hunger. So a human's going through a transition, becoming a monster, becoming an animal of sorts, but from a different reason, from a hunger, from a cold, from a loneliness, right?
Yeah.
yeah. With your analogy on the older vampire type thing, I think the older they get, and not just speaking of vampires, I'm talking about this story, the Wendigo and people with starvation or that have went to cannibalism to survive. I think the older or the further you get from that in time, the further you get from humanity, and the less there is to hold you back from doing the unspeakable. You understand what I mean? Like the first time you might be, "Oh my god, I can't believe I did that." The second time, the third time, and you keep doing it, you get further away from humanity, and I imagine the guardrails come off of what you're willing to do at that point, and it gets easier. And with no conscience, people are dangerous. And yeah, I think the longer you would go, the you've already justified it over and over again, so there wouldn't even be any hesitation, I would think. But how long you could go would be a question. Living that, I don't think you'd live real long after starting that behavior. But you would be unbridled, I think, the longer that you lasted.
Yeah. I agree with that. That kind of reminds me of I heard like an interview with a serial killer, and he was talking about, his evolution of killing, how the first couple were really scary. And as time went on, he didn't even think about it anymore. This wasn't human. He just did what he had to do and he didn't think anything of it. And
And
I
you
could
could say he's
say,
possessed by the Wendigo. You could say at
right.
that point he was
Yeah,
possessed. He had the devil in him. And
Yeah.
that
and
makes
so
sense.
I understand the translation. I think people were just using what they knew, deer and
Yeah. Hmm.
wild animals of the time. They didn't have our perspective of knowing everything in the world. But yeah, you're right, Jeff. I think you become a monster.
Could the stag idea come from potentially as these men of the woods that were starting to eat humans? Could they have potentially taken maybe if they found in the woods like the head of a deer or the carcass of a deer? Could they have potentially disguised themselves in order to, chase
True.
other humans?
Could
You
be.
know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, because a lot of these hunting parties were going out in the woods looking for deer, looking for something to eat, right? And if you see something in the distance that potentially has a look of a deer, and then as the closer you get, it's kind of more of a trap. Here's a man wearing a carcass of a deer, and now he's coming at you because you're close enough, and then here he is to devour you in a
Yeah,
sense,
that's
right?
what the berserkers did too when they raided the towns. They covered themselves in animal hide,
Yeah.
and yeah, and people it off puts somebody right away. I mean, it gives you the advantage, I would think. So
Right. That's where I think it may have stemmed from is, we looked at isolation making you crazy. Some people want the isolation too, like you're infringing on its territory. So yeah, maybe some woodsman like fashioned that stag into a like a cap to wear and just was making these ungodly sounds. Plus, you could like put mud on you and stuff and just started chasing people. And then, when people are trying to figure out what the hell are we seeing? They're like, well, I heard of a Wendigo, and then they put two and two together and now it has, antlers.
yeah, and I think the possessed thing came from people who were caught and facing justice, and I heard several stories where they talked about I don't I was possessed. I was Something took over. I don't know what it was. I don't remember what happened. It was that kind of thing. And I think that's where the possession thing grew too, from their defense of saying something just. And I even hear that from the skiers that have had to do it to survive. They even have talked that way, like um, I I was something took over, kind of, you know.
Well,
Got you.
one of the bigger themes as I kept going and doing a little bit more research was symbolism. And, in a lot of our buried stories, we would talk about, potentially the story itself, and then we would kind of go into the potential symbolism. And there seemed to be a lot of themes of symbolism in the story of the Wendigo, especially when it came to Native Americans. And some of them that kept popping up were metaphor of imbalance and disharmony, not only an individual but society. I found that theme kind of running in it. It only talked about the more Wendigo consumed, the larger it got, which means it needed even more food, right? So there goes that you guys had mentioned the theme of greed. The theme of greed just kept popping up in
Yeah.
the story of the Wendigo, and kind of let's see, mental disorder. I know you had talked about that quite a bit there, Wendell, with it. And story used to encourage a balanced lifestyle and respect for one's peers and the world surrounding them. I found that very interesting. However, you described the Wendigo, that theme, that starvation, that loneliness, the need for consumption. That same symbolism kept coming up over and over again. And I find it interesting. I really do.
Not only the greed, the legend has grown that the Wendigo shows up to take care of greedy people, but also selfish people. And they put it in terms of you not wanting to take care of your neighbor, you just want to take care of you. And and that's when the Wendigo presented itself. So we talked about the old stories about keeping the stories they would tell to keep kids in at night. Some of the things we talked about. I think in the villages, this legend has grown also for some social reasons, from people seeking greed and being selfish and not being in the community spirit, that kind of thing. Where small, like Jeff said, you're talking about small villages. So they notice if you're over in the corner playing your video game while everybody else is tending the fields, they notice that. And
Right.
not that video games in the villages, but that's what you know what I'm saying. I'm saying they notice if you're not pulling your fair share. And I think the legend itself grew with the Wendigo will show up and consume you if you are selfish or greedy and things like that. So I think there's a social angle from it too, as far as the legend goes. Um, but no doubt you become something different when you cross those lines of from hunger and things. And I think that was the initial presence of it. But who knows? Maybe when you get to that point, you do get possessed. You know, you have to be possessed to go any further. And
Right.
so there's some interesting takes on it, but it all makes sense. Especially, I mean, can you imagine going out in your yard and for the next week you cannot go in your house at all?
No, I can't imagine.
No.
No.
You know, I can't imagine doing that now. It
Right.
would,
Right.
of course, it has a lot to do with where we're at and our era that we live in. We'd be bored out of our skulls, but can you just imagine that you and the grass and the trees and that's it? Um,
No, see, that's where the isolation falls into play. But the more we talk about this, it sounds almost like it was like an area wide phenomena where I can imagine like the Midwest would get really cold and get a lot of snow. So you're stuck there for months until everything starts to melt. And so you're not only trying to survive yourself, but your family, your tribe, and then the tribe next to you is doing the same thing. And the tribe over the hill is doing the same thing. And they would catch people probably hoarding food,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and stuff
that
and
was a
trying
big one,
to
hoarding food.
yeah, and keeping things to themselves, but also other villages coming over and stealing your food too for survival. So this is a big survival cryptid to me.
Well, and imagine you gotta eat what you kill. So if you
Right.
don't kill
Yeah.
anything, you don't eat. So you're
Yeah.
out there killing the animals to eat, but the animals run out for whatever reason, the winter, the what migration, drought, whatever. But you still that process still doesn't stop for you. You still have to
Right.
kill and you still have to eat and or farm and eat if you want to substitute farm for kill, but you have to produce. There's no not producing. There's no truck gonna pull up with your food in it. And just imagine living in that lifestyle, how crazy it could get at times.
Yeah.
I imagine Algonquin, Illinois is not the only place this ever happened. I imagine this happened all over the world through history,
Yeah.
knowing that
Yeah.
in order to eat, you have to kill. And
Hmm.
if there's nothing to kill on four legs, some crazy thoughts might
Yeah.
go through your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think that I agree with Wendell. I mean, this is seems to be the theme. They talked a lot about the Great Lakes and the Midwest, right? And I know that we've all grown up in that area, and then Lord knows it gets extremely cold. And we're lucky enough today to have today's modern technology and everything, but I can't imagine a couple hundred years ago. And like you had mentioned, Wendell, these villages are tiny, these and so obviously you're going to have and then you're so dependent on each other at your fellow neighbor, right? You're so dependent on them working, you working. Everybody's got a job to do, everybody's got to do the job. And then you have these long winter months that you have to try to survive through. Winter kept being a theme that would pop up with the Wendigo, the silent spirit, the silent night, the cold. So no, I agree 100%. And I think it's interesting that here we are to even today with today's technology still talking about this old Native American story that we've heard of. And there's even movies that made. I think Guillermo del
Hmm.
Toro made a fantastic movie about the Wendigo. And so I personally look, this is a scary tale, whether you're talking about the symbolism of it all the way to the virtual idea of what the Native Americans were talking about so long ago.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I
I
think
think the
Jeff,
Native Americans would get a bad rap. I think they've always got a bad rap for being savage. I think they
Hmm.
had to be savage to survive.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like Jeff said, your neighbors come over to steal your food or, uh, you know, you've got to get to a point to where survival's it. And like you said, Steve, not only are you surviving the winter, the long winter in the Midwest, when you get out of that long winter, what's the next the good weather months? What are you doing? You're preparing for the next winter. That's
Yeah, you ain't kidding.
the
That's
never-ending
what we
cycle.
should look into is, all right, what cryptid did they have when the rainy season came around,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I'll tell you what, I mean, they are the Native Americans are fascinating with all their, cryptids and, just their lore that they grew up with and passed down to us, and you can see how we changed it, tweaked it a little bit, and, put it out there to get clicks or something, but very fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's they talk about a lot of spirits, right? A lot of
Mhm.
spirits, whether there's evil spirits, whether there's good spirits, malevolent spirits, benevolent spirits, and ultimately it kind of shaped their lifestyle, shaped their nature, shaped their seasons, right? And so you could see how Wendigo being kind of what would you'd think of maybe more of a winter, like we talked about, a winter a spirit, and it would shape their behaviors over the winter, right? Because we kept mentioning greed. And I'll tell you what, for me, this makes a fantastic buried story, whether you believe the ideology or the symbolism of it or whatever it is, or maybe you believe the creature could potentially exist up there and there's a lot of people that live off the grid in Alaska that talk about it, and they make shows about these obviously not the Wendigo, but the people who live up there in the loneliness, up there in the Arctic Circle and everything. I mean, these are people who have had to learn to survive, and everything. So, I think there's still that same kind of mentality that exists in humanity. But ultimately, Jeff, I think this is a fantastic buried story.
Yeah,
I
it's fun to talk about. Wendell, go ahead.
It's one of the more one that's pretty logical to me, and I like logic. The at least logic that I agree with. Um, and it's one of the stories like when were talking about we were going to talk about the Wendigo. I thought, oh boy, let me see what who says what about this. But really, it really is logical. And we used the term vampires a minute ago, but I think at that point where starvation drives you to do what you're going to have to do to survive. It's like getting bit by a vampire. You're different. You're
Yeah,
different after that,
yeah.
and the hunger is consuming you, and so it made a lot of sense with the possessions, and it made a lot of sense the people that got caught that did it that were cannibalistic and got caught made a lot of sense. Their defense was, I don't know what happened. I don't even remember what happened. You know, you know, Jeff and Steve had to go. I don't remember.
Right.
And so it all made a lot of sense, and I could see how the legend could be born because it is we're all we all have that devil inside of us, I guess you would say, and I think um, when you're in a small group, a clan, a village, um, when they think you have the devil inside of you, you would be ostracized immediately. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? If they think you've got it in you, they know we're all capable of it, and that's why you do your worshiping, and that's why you do your burning the fires at night and facing east and all that, and all the different tribal customs and stuff is to ward off those spirits, and um, and I can see in a small clan when you do start acting different to everybody else, and God forbid if they, look at the Salem witch trials, same kind of thing. They think the devil's in you or the Wendigo's in you, and then we have a problem. So,
Yeah, I could see the group ostracizing the person. Like, imagine us sitting around a fire and stuff. And Steve's like, I haven't been feeling correct in a while. Steve, why are you looking at me, man?
I know, Steve.
You
Uh,
look pretty good tonight. Wendell Bun. So, yeah,
Oh
that
Lord.
camp story probably, yeah, that camp around the circle probably got a little weird at times. But, Steve, any last thoughts on the Wendigo?
You know, there's plenty of stories of human cannibalism over the years, right? And you know, it's interesting that this is kind of the first one we've talked about where it led to some cryptid. And you know, like I said, whether it's the actual symbolism of the story itself, or it's actually talking about a creature, I just find it fascinating. And it's always fascinating that somehow we end up going to an ancient story, right? An ancient monster, an ancient spirit. And I love that about this show because I really think we're trying to bring these stories that ancients talked about, literally a buried story. We're trying to unearth it and bring it out into the forefront of what it is that we talk about. So
Yeah. Any last thoughts on the Wendigo, Wendell?
No, just like what I said, I don't think it's a 9-foot creature. I think it's from what I saw, it's people that have crossed the line, and you can call them being possessed or something, but they changed. That's what I think the truth of it is, you know, of these stories. But I can see, I can see how the legend's born and how people can look at them like monsters, because you are if you do those kind of things and you're still around, you are a monster.
So yeah, yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if that's our thoughts on the Wendigo, if you would like to leave a comment, please leave a comment below. Hit that like button, subscribe. And if you got a story you'd like to share, send it to us at berrystories74@gmail.com. And from Steve and Wendell and myself, Jeff, thank you for watching.